Let's look at the reason that we're to differentiate Husserel's version from Plato's version, and at least in the case of Husserel, obviously to repudiate his version because it's defective, or because of, as it were, because of its defects, if it's not simply defective in its essence. So I'll rehearse afterwards. Well, no, let's do it first. So he starts with Husserel. I was going to say that I'll show the paths that he took to arrive at his idea after saying what the idea is. But let's just start by saying he began with Descartes, and then he takes it that there's something, a pine tree, for instance, and it's not his first interest to say that what the pine tree is. That's sort of his secondary question is go to dusting on Fischer to the thing in itself. So he doesn't assume Descartes' answer. Descartes' answer to what the thing in itself is was basically quantity, basically the quantifiable extension understood as quantifiable, and then which could then be turned into mathematical terms. But Husserl doesn't say we know already what the thing in itself is, but he assumes there's a thing in itself. And so he takes the step immediately past Descartes, you could argue in different ways. Descartes says, that we could conceive of the thinking thing on its own, but then what he actually argues is that both the thinking thing and the material understood as quantifiable and being able to put it into his grid and all that. But just taking Descartes' so-called thinking thing side, we don't yet have to go to a question of what's the answer to what the thing is in itself, aside from how it seems, aside from what it is as available to us. But Husserl's already before, so here's the main point, already before trying to give an account of Es Regnet, it rains, here, but before starting to make this scientific work that Husserl tries to do, what he says is the main thing is there's this noema, or the intelligible things, as I said, redwoods, some other kind of trees too, some different kind of thing. We could distinguish them. Those are the different, it's a plural, noema, but then there's also this thing, noesis, which corresponds to thinking. But why isn't noesis just the same thing as nous, as nous in the ancients, in the Athenians, the Theseus beyond people, the democratic Apollonian Athenian people. Apollonian covers the whole sort of pan Hellenistic world. They use pan Hellenistic somehow advisedly. I know usually Hellenistic is used to mean the time of Alexander and past that, but I'm using it to say this world of the first philosophers, and then of Socrates and Plato, and the archipelago of policies, which apparently there's like at least more than 1,000. I looked it up and I keep forgetting, but it was it's more than 1,000. So Hussurel thought, okay, there's something happening, and it's like a thesis. It's like perception. It's like seeing. It's like something else, and it's happening right here. That's the difference with nous. Nous and the idea doesn't work that way. It doesn't work on an analogy with the senses. That's the difference between the way the ancients thought about the question of the idea of nous and the idea, and Hussurel thought about this distinction between noesis, or this action of thinking, and the noema, or the object of it. They have nous, idea, noesis, noema. So Hussurel is then in this dualist system, and that's why he has the Natureinstellung, or the natural attitude, and the theoretical attitude. And this is what Heidegger says, but why only these two? And at the same time, Heidegger says this Husserl repeats the problem of the mind and body, but in a new way. And he does it especially by taking over Lotze's notion of the, I think it's called something like Geltung, instead of say validity, but it has something to do with, in fact, with enumeration, because it has to do with the word Geld, or money. Or somehow the word is related, the word validity is related to the word Geltung, is related to the word Geld. But because it has to do somehow with these units of calculation. So Husserl has a system based on these presuppositions, whereas looking back, we could see also Plato by insisting that the senses have their realm, and nous, or the realm of truth, as its realm, has also made a presupposition. So this is why Heidegger tries to say, no, I'm going to draw back and, in a positive way, try to show that I'm not merely like Nietzsche saying, oh, these are all wrong, but rather I'm showing in a positive, I can try to step back and let be. I can try to ask the question without these presuppositions. Now, somebody will, of course, immediately say, and Nietzsche seems to whisper to Heidegger sometimes, but what about your buried presuppositions? What about your unconscious, etc., etc.? But so the answer to this is always invariably something along the line of, there could be all these criticisms, but they're alien to Heidegger as Heidegger, and maybe Heidegger, the path he's taking, maybe it's the truth of being. Maybe it's the truth of being. So if you read Heidegger by his own attitude, then maybe it's the truth of being. Now, when we apply that back to Plato and even to Husserl, then clearly we could say we could take Husserl from his own ground. And then the question is more like, is this really cogent for us in our time? Or is it that for us in our time, Heidegger is really more cogent? Now, the question whether Plato is more cogent is somewhat vexed, I think, because partially it's a question that comes into the difficulty with accepting Socrates' version. And there's a transition of Socrates' version, I think, that happened historically through the sort of relinquishing of ethnopoetic attempts to shape the character to make them more like Socrates. But aside from that, I guess the question is whether I don't think that the notion that we're a sense-bearing animal that then has nous is very cogent today, because I think the reason is one, when you get a question like, the common sense way of dealing with things is to say, well, is that in the senses? It's almost always wrong. Like, oh, did you see that? Well, people missee things and hallucinate all the time. It's not a good evidence. But on the other hand, when we act like Sherlock Holmes, when we make inferences, they're way better than experience, because none of us have any experience of what happened to Nicole Brown Simpson and her fiancé, but we all know that O.J. Simpson hacked them to death, even though he went free for it, because we could draw that inference. It's much more certain than if we had actually witnessed it. If we actually witnessed it, we might black it out because it'd be too dramatic. Who knows? Or we might not believe it because O.J. told us not to believe it, and then he's a nice guy. He's convincing on the system, one level or whatever. But I think the fact that the Earth is turning, and so this basic anti-common sense thing that right now you say, oh, don't you believe your senses? But no, actually my senses tell me we're standing still, but no, we're moving, and the universe is moving, everything's happening, but our senses just aren't telling us the truth. I think that's the real hardcore example that shows that you have to do phenomenology. You can't simply have we're an animal with a certain kind of senses view. It's not cogent. We don't actually believe that. There's something else that's larger than that, that's in the question of knowledge, and that's why it's said so commonly that since Descartes, epistemological questions have come, even though they were always played a big role, they always played some role, but they became to totally predominate after Descartes. And the reason is because the dream question in Theaetetus doesn't have that same motivation of the fact that the Earth is turning, and it only has the motivation of hallucinations, people being crazy, and things that had to do with the faulty human being. Or we're dreaming, which is sort of also seems like sort of a little bit, even though, yeah, you can kind of force yourself to see that, it also has some fancifulness to it. But the fact that we're in a so-called frame of reference and we don't know it, the hard physical fact of that, I think makes it impossible to stay with the view of the ancients on us being an animal. We're not an animal. Some kind of animal that also has rationality. I don't, if it being an animal means that we could be crushed, that we could die, that's true. But maybe that means this stuff, there's stones, there's the worm that has certain feelings, and there's the animal in the sense that an animal has multiple senses. And then there's somehow a question that's on the same level as the frame of reference question and the history question and then the question of jumping, and then when you jump away from Hussurel, what Heidegger had to do is make this leap where he no longer treated his investigation as an analogy on the senses. At the same time, this means that he also gave up the question of the mind as setting eternal validity, in the sense that Hussurel had carried over the notion of validity from Lotze, and basically reapplied mutatis mutandis, as we've just endeavored to show, reapplied it to his new nature theory dichotomy.